The mansion on Mercer Island wore its silence like expensive perfume, carefully applied, deliberately maintained, utterly sterile. 6:45 on an October morning, and the pale light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows caught particles of dust that had no business existing in a house staffed by 8 people whose sole purpose was to eliminate imperfection. Victoria Hayes sat in her home office on the second floor, fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard with the mechanical precision of someone who'd spent 17 years making money appear from algorithms and market predictions. The quarterly reports from her tech portfolio needed review before the 9 o'clock call with Singapore. Numbers were predictable. Numbers made sense. Numbers didn't look at you with accusation in their eyes. The baby monitor on her desk crackled with static, a relic from years past that she'd never bothered to remove. White noise, mostly. Sometimes the rustle of fabric as the overnight nurse adjusted blankets. Victoria had learned to tune it out the way people in cities learn to ignore sirens. Then a sound cut through that wasn't white noise at all. Soft, fragile, so delicate the air itself seemed to pause just to make space for it. Daddy. Victoria's fingers froze mid-keystroke. The Hermes handbag perched on the edge of her desk tipped, fell, hit the Italian marble floor with a sound like a gunshot muffled by expensive leather. Her chest constricted. The emerald green eyes that Forbes had once described as calculating enough to make venture capitalists nervous went wide, locked on the monitor as if she could see through the plastic speaker grill into the therapy room 1 floor below. 8 years. 8 years of neurologists and specialists and therapists who spoke in careful clinical tones about realistic expectations. 8 years of silence so complete it had become another family member, always present at the table, always taking up space in rooms that should have been filled with laughter. Daddy! Clearer this time. Stronger. Not a hallucination. Not her imagination creating something from nothing because she'd gone 72 hours on 4 hours of sleep. Victoria stood so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Coffee sloshed over the rim of her cup, spreading a dark stain across papers that represented $3 million in pending investments. She didn't notice, didn't care. Her heels clicked against the floor as she moved toward the door, then stopped, some instinct she didn't understand pulling her back. Downstairs, the therapy room existed in its own pocket of the universe. Soft wool rug, cream-colored walls, equipment that cost more than most people's cars arranged with the aesthetic sensibility of someone who believes suffering should at least be photographed well. The morning light here was warmer, filtered through gauze curtains that Victoria's decorator had insisted would create a calming environment. Marcus Reed knelt on that expensive rug in his Navy janitorial uniform, work gloves tucked into his back pocket, arms open toward 2 small figures in specialized wheelchairs. His voice carried none of the polish of the speech therapists Victoria had hired and fired over the years. Just warmth. Just certainty. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm right here. Lily Hayes, 8 years old, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail someone else had tied, body rigid in the supportive chair that cost $11,000, made a sound in her throat. Her sister Rose, mirror image, except for the small scar on her left temple from a seizure 3 years back, turned her head. Their eyes, usually unfocused and distant, tracked toward Marcus with an intensity that would have stopped Victoria's heart if she'd been in the room to see it. Daddy, Rose whispered, and this time there was no question about it. The word hung in the air like something solid, something that could be touched and held and examined. Marcus's hands trembled. He'd been cleaning these floors for 8 weeks, 63 days if you counted weekends, which he did because Emma needed her medications 7 days a week and medical bills didn't take holidays. 63 days of watching these 2 girls sit in their chairs like beautiful statues, present but absent, breathing but not quite living. He'd started talking to them anyway, the way he talked to Emma when she had bad days and couldn't respond. Not because he expected answers, because silence without witness was its own kind of death. Say it again, he whispered, and his voice cracked on the second word. Can you say it again for me? Victoria stood in the doorway now, one hand pressed against the frame, hard enough that her knuckles went white. She'd moved without conscious thought, her body understanding before her mind caught up that she needed to see this, needed to witness whatever was happening in this room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and the lavender oil someone had recommended for calming effects. Lily's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The muscle movements were crude, uncoordinated, the kind of thing that reminded anyone watching that these weren't typical children learning to form typical sounds. These were children whose brains had been starved of oxygen in the womb, whose motor neurons misfired and stuttered, whose every physical action required 10 times the effort it should. Daddy. The sound came from somewhere deep in Lily's chest, pushed up through a throat that had never shaped language before, past lips that trembled with the effort. It wasn't clean. It wasn't clear. It was the most beautiful thing Marcus had heard since Emma said his name for the first time 3 years after her birth. He pulled both girls toward him, gently, always gently. His PT training burned into muscle memory, even after 6 years away from the profession, and let them rest against his chest. Lily's fingers twitched against his forearm. Rose made another sound, not quite a word, but close enough that Marcus felt his eyes burn. Good girls, he managed. Such good, brave girls. Victoria's world tilted on its axis and didn't right itself. She backed away from the door, moving with the careful precision of someone walking on ice that might crack at any moment. The hallway seemed longer than it had been 60 seconds ago. Her bedroom felt like a foreign country. She sat on the edge of the bed she'd shared with Michael for 7 years before a malfunctioning altimeter sent his Cessna into the side of a mountain near Hood Canal. The comforter still carried the faint scent of the detergent his mother had recommended. Another thing Victoria had never changed because changing it felt like losing him twice. Her daughters, her children, flesh of her flesh, the only pieces of Michael still walking this earth, had just spoken their first words. To the janitor. Not to her, not mama or mommy or any variation thereof. Not even her name, which they'd heard thousands of times in the 8 years since their traumatic birth had stolen so much from all of them. They'd called him Daddy, the man she'd hired through a staffing agency 8 weeks ago, the man whose background check had come back clean but unremarkable, the man she'd glimpsed exactly 4 times before this morning, always in her peripheral vision as she moved through her own house like a ghost haunting rooms she'd stopped really living in. Victoria's throat burned, her chest ached. Something inside her that she'd carefully walled off with work and routine, and the blessed numbness of exhaustion began to crack, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to hold it together. 8 weeks Marcus had been in this house. 8 weeks versus 8 years of the best medical care money could buy. Speech therapists from Johns Hopkins, neurologists from UCSF, equipment imported from Germany and Japan and Switzerland. $3 million spent, and Victoria could recite every diagnosis, every grim prognosis, every carefully worded suggestion that perhaps she should adjust her expectations. Spastic cerebral palsy with severe dysarthria, the last neurologist had said. The girls can process language. Their cognitive function is relatively intact. But the motor neurons controlling speech are damaged. They may never develop verbal communication. May never. Not will never, Victoria had noticed, clinging to that tiny slip of uncertainty the way drowning people cling to debris. But in 8 years, that may had calcified into accepted truth. The girls didn't speak. They couldn't speak. Victoria had built her understanding of motherhood around that immutable fact. Except it wasn't immutable. It wasn't even true. And a man in a janitor's uniform had just proved it. Victoria stood, smoothed her skirt with hands that still shook, and walked back downstairs. The rational part of her brain, the part that had built a $200 million portfolio from a $50,000 inheritance and a willingness to see patterns where others saw chaos, insisted she needed answers. The rest of her, the parts she'd locked away when Michael died and the girls were born 3 months premature, and the doctors started using words like significant impairment, just needed to understand why her children had found their voices in the arms of a stranger. Marcus sat on the floor between the wheelchairs now, writing something in a brown leather notebook, head bowed slightly, humming under his breath. The melody was familiar in a way that made Victoria's stomach clench. Michael used to hum that tune when he was thinking, when he was happy, when he was doing the crossword puzzle in the Sunday Times and pretending he didn't look up half the answers on his phone. The girls breathed steadily in their chairs, faces peaceful in a way Victoria had spent 8 years trying to create through the right therapy schedule and the perfect room temperature and organic meals prepared by a private chef. Rose's hand twitched slightly. Marcus reached out without looking up, adjusted the blanket around her shoulders with the kind of casual tenderness that suggested he'd done it 100 times before. He didn't look like Michael. Michael had been tall, blonde, New England prep school handsome with a jaw that photographs loved, and a smile that had sold her on a second date, even though she'd sworn off tech entrepreneurs after the last one, turned out to be leveraged to his eyeballs and lying about it. Marcus was shorter, maybe 5'10", with the kind of lean build that came from physical work rather than personal trainers. Messy brown hair shot through with gray, skin weathered from sun exposure, hands that showed calluses and old scars. But the feeling he brought into the room, warmth, presence, the sense that someone was paying attention, that felt exactly like what Michael used to bring before a faulty instrument panel, and bad weather stole him from all of them. Victoria turned away before Marcus noticed her watching. She made it to her office, closed the door, and stood with her back against it for 5 full minutes before her breathing steadied enough to think clearly. Tomorrow she would talk to him. Tomorrow she would demand explanations and timelines and detailed accounts of exactly what he'd been doing with her daughters while she was upstairs moving numbers around spreadsheets. Tonight she would lie awake and try not to think about the fact that Lily and Rose had smiled at Marcus Reed in a way they'd never smiled at her. The Hayes estate existed in the kind of neighborhood where even the morning joggers looked affluent, where Tesla charging stations outnumbered parking meters, and where the smallest house still cleared $3 million if you caught the market right. Marcus drove past those houses every morning at 5:15, his 14-year-old Honda Civic coughing blue smoke that probably violated 6 different emission standards. 8 weeks ago, he'd pulled into the service entrance for the first time, nerves making his hands slick on the steering wheel. The job posting had been vague: estate maintenance, flexible hours, competitive pay. But Marcus had learned that flexible hours usually meant whatever we need you to work, and competitive pay meant competitive with what we think your time is worth, not what you think it's worth. He'd needed it anyway. Emma's anti-seizure medication cost $800 a month after insurance, and his coverage through the Redmond apartment complex, where he worked afternoons, had a deductible that reset every year like some kind of cosmic joke. This would be job number 3, slotted into the morning hours before his shift at the complex and his weekend work, doing facilities maintenance at a medical plaza in Bellevue. The man who'd met him at the service entrance that first morning had been Charlie Mendoza, 55 years old with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and forearms that suggested he had spent his life working with his hands. The estate's electrician, as it turned out, though his actual role seemed to encompass anything that broke and needed fixing. "Welcome to the palace, hermano." Charlie's handshake had been firm, his eyes sharp in a way that Marcus recognized from his own mirror. Someone who'd seen too much and decided to keep seeing anyway. "You the new cleaning guy?" Marcus Reed. He'd pulled his hand back, tried for a smile that probably looked as exhausted as he felt. "And yeah, that's me." Charlie had studied him for a long moment, the kind of assessment that felt like an X-ray. Then he'd nodded, gestured toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you where we keep the stuff you'll need. Fair warning though, Ba Hayes runs a tight ship. Everything has a place. Everything stays in that place. And if you ever see her coming, make yourself invisible until she passes." "That bad?" "Not bad, just—" Charlie had paused at the door, one hand on the frame. Frozen, like someone took a person and dipped them in liquid nitrogen. Beautiful on the outside, dead cold all the way through. 8 weeks later, Marcus understood what Charlie had meant. Victoria Hayes moved through her own house like a museum curator, checking exhibits, present but not participating, observing but not engaging. In 63 days of morning shifts, Marcus had heard her speak maybe 20 complete sentences, none of them directed at him. But that first day, Charlie had walked him through the staff areas, explained the schedule, showed him the supply closets, and then, almost as an afterthought, mentioned the children. "Mrs. Hayes has twin daughters, 8 years old. They don't walk, don't talk. Got some kind of brain thing from being born too early. There's a full-time nurse, couple therapy people who come in, whole setup. You'll probably hear them sometimes when you're cleaning the second floor. Just ignore it. Not your problem. Marcus had nodded, filed the information away, assumed he'd never interact with the girls at all. Then he'd seen them. Third day on the YM, he'd been cleaning the hallway outside the therapy room when Dr. Sarah Chen, the day nurse, young and competent and clearly exhausted, had wheeled the girls out for what she called environmental exposure. Marcus had stepped aside to let them pass, started to look away the way people do when confronted with disability they don't know how to acknowledge. But Lily had turned her head, just slightly, just enough that for a fraction of a second, her eyes had focused on his face instead of the middle distance where they usually lived. Marcus had frozen. In that moment, he hadn't seen an 8-year-old girl with cerebral palsy in an $11,000 wheelchair. He'd seen Emma, his daughter, his whole world, the reason he worked 3 jobs and survived on 5 hours of sleep and couldn't remember the last time he'd bought himself new shoes. Emma, who'd been born at 30 weeks with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck. Emma, whose first 3 years of life had been silent because the oxygen deprivation had damaged the motor neurons she needed to speak. Emma, who'd finally said Dada when she was 4 years old, and Marcus had cried for 20 minutes in the parking lot of Seattle Children's Hospital while his ex-wife sat in the car and refused to look at him. He'd knelt down to Lily's eye level. Dr. Chen had looked surprised but hadn't stopped him. "Hi there, my name's Marcus. What's yours?" No response. Lily's eyes had already drifted away, back to whatever internal world she inhabited. Dr. Chen had offered a tight smile. "That's Lily. Her sister is Rose. They don't really respond to interaction, but it's nice of you to try." Marcus had straightened, nodded, watched the nurse wheel both girls away. That night, lying in his cramped apartment, while Emma slept in the next room with her breathing monitor beeping softly, he thought about those 2 little girls trapped in bodies that wouldn't cooperate, and minds that understood everything but couldn't communicate anything back. He thought about the loneliness of that, the particular kind of hell that came from being present but invisible, capable of processing the world but unable to affect it. The next morning, he'd brought his old copy of Where the Wild Things Are to work. During his break, he'd asked Dr. Chen if he could sit with the girls for 15 minutes. She'd looked skeptical, but hadn't said no. Marcus had pulled up a chair between their wheelchairs, opened the book, and started reading. Not in the bright, performative voice people used with children they assumed couldn't understand. Just his normal voice, the same one he used with Emma. As if Lily and Rose were perfectly capable of following along, perfectly entitled to a story, perfectly worth his time. Lily hadn't reacted. Rose had blinked twice. It wasn't much, but it was something. For 8 weeks, Marcus had spent his breaks reading to them, talking to them, asking them questions he didn't expect them to answer. And slowly, so slowly, he'd almost convinced himself he was imagining it. Their eyes had started to track his movements when he entered the room. Their breathing had shifted when they heard his voice. Rose's fingers had begun to curl and uncurl when he read particularly exciting parts of stories. He'd started incorporating things he'd learned during his 6 years as a physical therapy aide at Seattle Children's Hospital. Gentle pressure point massage around the jaw and throat, the kind of thing that increased blood flow to facial motor neurons. Humming exercises where he'd place their hands on his chest so they could feel the vibration. Teaching their bodies what speech felt like from the inside out. Dr. Chen had noticed, "What are you doing with them? I've never seen them this responsive." Marcus had shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just talking. Kids can tell when people actually see them, when you're not just going through motions." The therapists Mrs. Hayes hired cost $300 an hour. Yeah, well, Marcus had adjusted Rose's blanket, checked to make sure Lily's head support was properly positioned. Sometimes the expensive answer isn't the right one. He'd been thinking about Emma when he said it, about all the specialists who'd told him she'd never speak, never communicate, never be anything more than a body that needed care. About how he'd ignored every single one of them and just kept showing up, kept trying, kept believing that his daughter was in there somewhere and deserved to be seen. "There's something worse than not being able to speak," he'd told Dr. Chen that afternoon. "It's when nobody truly listens." She'd looked at him for a long time after that, like she was reassessing something fundamental. This morning when Lily and Rose had called him Daddy, Marcus's first thought had been that he'd finally lost it. 3 jobs, chronic sleep deprivation, and the constant low-grade terror of not having enough money for Emma's medications had finally broken something in his brain and created an auditory hallucination. But then Rose had said it again, and Lily had tried to reach for him, and Marcus had understood that 8 weeks of simply being present, of treating these girls like the whole human beings they were, had given them enough safety to try. He'd been writing down the details in his notebook, what time they'd spoken, what words they'd used, how their mouths had moved, when he'd sensed someone watching from the doorway. A quick glance had confirmed what he'd suspected. Victoria Hayes, perfectly put together even at 7 in the morning, staring at her daughters like she'd never seen them before. Marcus had pretended not to notice. Whatever was happening in Victoria's head right now, she needed space to process it. And he needed to record every detail of this breakthrough before his memory smoothed over the rough edges. Lily had spoken, Rose had spoken. After 8 years of silence, they'd found their voices. Marcus just hoped their mother could find hers in return. The kitchen on the main floor of the Hayes estate could have housed 3 families comfortably. Granite countertops stretched for days, commercial-grade appliances gleamed with chrome perfection, and the walk-in pantry held more organic, artisanal, locally sourced ingredients than most grocery stores. Charlie Mendoza sat at the small staff table in the corner, eating lunch from a metal container that had seen better decades. The smell of homemade carnitas filled the space, making the $500 coffee maker on the counter seem even more ridiculous by comparison. Marcus slid into the seat across from him, unwrapping the peanut butter sandwich he'd made at 4:30 that morning while Emma was still sleeping. "Heard you had an interesting morning." Charlie bit into a tortilla, raised an eyebrow. "Nurse Chen says the girls talked. First words ever. That true?" "Yeah." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. Failed. "They called me Daddy." Charlie stopped chewing, set down his food, leaned back in his chair with the kind of careful stillness that suggested he understood exactly how significant that was. "Mierda, hermano. I mean, 8 years those kids haven't made a sound, right? And you've been here, what, 2 months? 8 weeks, 63 days. And the ba? She know?" She was there, in the doorway, watching. Charlie whistled low. How'd she take it? Didn't stick around long enough to find out. Marcus took a bite of sandwich that tasted like cardboard and anxiety. Just saw her for a second, then she disappeared. Yeah, that tracks. Charlie pushed his container across the table. Eat some real food, man. You look like you're about to pass out. I'm fine. You work 3 jobs, got a disabled kid at home, and you just had a major emotional breakthrough with 2 other disabled kids who aren't yours. You're not fine. Eat. Marcus took a tortilla, mostly because arguing would take more energy than complying. The carnitas were good. Of course they were good. Charlie's wife had been cooking for 50 years and could probably make tree bark taste amazing. You got kids, Charlie? 2 daughters, both grown now. One's a teacher in Portland. Other one's a marine biologist, lives in San Diego. Pride crept into Charlie's voice. Grandkids, too. 4 of them. Beautiful, healthy, loud as hell. That's good. Yeah. Charlie's expression shifted. My wife, Maria, she had our first when she was 22. Healthy pregnancy, no complications. Popped that baby out like she'd been doing it her whole life. Second one, same thing. We were lucky. Some people don't get lucky. Marcus thought about Emma, about Nicole standing in the hospital room 3 hours after their daughter's birth, staring at the monitors and the tubes and the tiny struggling body, and saying in a voice made of ice, "This is punishment. For something. I don't know what, but we must have done something to deserve this." He'd kicked her out of the room, filed for divorce 6 months later when it became clear she wouldn't bond with their daughter. Gotten full custody 18 months after that when Nicole had signed away her parental rights like she was terminating a cell phone contract. You got a kid too, right? Charlie's voice pulled Marcus back to the present. Chen mentioned something. Daughter, Emma, she's 9, has quadriplegic cerebral palsy, more severe than Lily and Rose. Quadriplegic. Charlie absorbed that. Can she talk? Yeah, took until she was 4, but yeah, limited vocabulary, but she can communicate. About 30 words consistently, another 20 on good days. And that's why you knew what to do with Mrs. Hayes' girls. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. Emma taught me that disability isn't the same as inability. It's just different ability, different timeline. The specialist told me she'd never speak. Said I should focus on quality of life instead of false hope. His hands tightened around the tortilla. False hope, like hoping your kid might talk to you someday, is some kind of delusion. But you didn't give up. How could I? She's my daughter. Giving up on her would be like giving up on breathing. Charlie nodded slowly. And now you're doing the same thing for someone else's kids. I'm just cleaning floors and reading stories. Hermano, Charlie leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know what I see when I look around this place? I see a woman who has everything money can buy and nothing money can give. I see 2 little girls who live in a palace but might as well be in a prison. And I see you working 3 jobs, raising a disabled kid alone, barely scraping by, showing up every morning and giving those girls something their own mother can't. Mrs. Hayes loves her daughters. I'm sure she does. Love isn't the problem. The problem is she thinks she can buy solutions, hire experts, throw money at the situation until it looks the way she wants it to. Charlie picked up his container again. In this world, hermano, there are 2 kinds of people. Those who pay to solve problems and those who show up to solve them. You're the second kind. Marcus wasn't sure that was entirely fair to Victoria. Grief did strange things to people. He'd seen it in Nicole, the way she'd withdrawn after Emma's diagnosis until there was nothing left but a shell. He recognized the same pattern in the way Victoria moved through her house. Present but not living, functioning but not feeling. Maybe she just needs time. Maybe she needs someone to show her what actual presence looks like. Charlie pushed back from the table, stood. Either way, you did good today. Those girls talking? That's a miracle, man. Don't downplay it. Marcus watched him go, then sat alone in the kitchen that cost more than his annual salary, eating someone else's home cooking, and trying not to think about the fact that he'd just become monumentally important to 2 children who weren't his responsibility. His phone buzzed. Emma's daytime caregiver texting to confirm pickup time. Marcus responded, checked his watch, calculated how many hours until he could hold his own daughter, and remember why he did any of this. Victoria Hayes sat in her office with the door locked and a background check report spread across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. She called the staffing agency at 9:30, used her most frigid corporate voice to demand Marcus Reed's complete employment history, and received the digital file within 90 minutes. Now she read it for the 3rd time, each pass revealing details she'd somehow missed before. Marcus James Reed, age 48, born in Spokane, Washington. Moved to Seattle at 19 for college. Seattle Pacific University. Dropped out after 2 years when his father died and he'd needed to work full-time to support his mother. No criminal record, no bankruptcy filings. 3 current employers. Hayes Estate Services, 8 weeks. Cascade Gardens. Apartment complex in Redmond, 4 years. Northwest Medical Plaza Facilities Maintenance, 2 years. Previous employment jumped out at her now. Seattle Children's Hospital, Physical Therapy Department, March 2010 through March 2018. 8 years as a PT aide specializing in pediatric neuromuscular disorders. Supervisor notes included in the file said things like exceptional patience with nonverbal children and demonstrates intuitive understanding of adaptive techniques and consistently goes above and beyond standard care protocols. Resignation noted as voluntary effective March 15, 2018. No disciplinary issues, no performance problems. Just a 1-sentence note. Personal family circumstances require full-time attention. Victoria cross-referenced the dates. March 2018, Emma Reed's birth certificate, attached as part of the family status documentation, showed the same month. His daughter had been born, and he'd quit a job he was clearly good at. The divorce records told the rest of the story in the kind of clinical language that made human tragedy sound like a business transaction. Nicole Ann Reed, née Patterson, filed for divorce in January 2020, citing irreconcilable differences. The custody battle, if you could call it that, had been brief. Nicole had requested zero parental time, zero custody rights, zero ongoing contact. The judge's note suggested confusion at a mother completely abandoning her child, but Nicole's lawyer had been clear. His client could not emotionally or psychologically cope with a severely disabled child and believed terminating all parental rights was in everyone's best interest. Marcus had gotten full legal and physical custody. Nicole had remarried 7 months later to a software engineer who worked at Microsoft, moved to the East Side, and apparently never looked back. Financial information painted a picture Victoria recognized from her early years, before Michael and before the trust fund from her grandmother had matured. Marcus's combined income from 3 jobs came to $42,000 a year. His apartment in Redmond, a rent-controlled unit in an older complex, cost $1,400 a month. Emma's medical expenses, even after insurance, ran another $1,000 monthly. Childcare while he worked totaled $600. Food, utilities, transportation, and everything else had to fit into what remained. The medical debt section made Victoria's chest tighten, $52,000 across 4 collection agencies, all related to Emma's care: emergency room visits for seizures, equipment insurance wouldn't cover, experimental therapies not approved by standard medical boards. He was drowning, working himself to exhaustion while raising a severely disabled daughter alone, and he was barely keeping his head above water. And yet every morning for 8 weeks, he'd shown up at her house and given her daughters something she'd failed to provide despite having resources he could barely imagine. Victoria closed the file, opened her laptop, pulled up the security footage from the therapy room. The Hayes estate had cameras everywhere, not in bedrooms or bathrooms, but in common areas, hallways, and yes, the therapy room. She'd installed them after Michael's death when paranoia about losing her daughters too had reached clinical levels. She'd never actually reviewed the footage before. Dr. Chen sent daily reports. The therapist submitted detailed progress notes. Victoria had convinced herself that monitoring the monitoring was sufficient. Now she scrolled back through 8 weeks of recordings, watching Marcus interact with Lily and Rose when he thought no one was paying attention. Week 1, he'd simply sat with them during breaks, not doing anything, just being present, talking about his morning drive, the weather, random thoughts about nothing important. The girls hadn't responded at all, but Marcus had kept talking anyway. Week 2, he'd started bringing a book, reading aloud, showing them pictures even though their eyes didn't focus on the pages. His voice was steady, unhurried, treating them like an audience that mattered even though they gave him nothing back. Week 3, the first physical contact. Gentle massage around Lily's jaw and throat, explaining what he was doing in a voice that assumed she understood. This helps the muscles remember how to work together. Doesn't hurt, just feels like pressure. Rose had watched, her eyes tracking his hands with the first sign of focused attention Victoria had seen in years. Week 4, humming exercises. Marcus would place the girls' hands on his chest and hum deep notes, letting them feel the vibration. That's what sound feels like from inside your body. Your voice is in there, just waiting to come out. Week 5, response. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. Lily's fingers had curled when Marcus started reading. Rose had made a sound in her throat during a humming exercise. Not a word, but vocalization. Marcus had frozen, eyes wide, then continued like nothing had happened. Weeks 6 through 8, progress accelerating. The girls turning their heads when Marcus entered the room. Rose attempting to mimic humming sounds. Lily's mouth movements becoming more deliberate during reading sessions. Marcus documenting everything in his brown notebook, checking and rechecking like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. And this morning, speech, actual words. The impossible becoming possible because someone had been patient enough to wait for it. Victoria closed the laptop, sat in the leather chair that had cost $4,000 and felt empty as a voting booth after the election's over. She'd spent $3 million on her daughter's care. Marcus Reed had spent 8 weeks in whatever you could buy for $42,000 a year. Her money had purchased equipment and credentials and therapy protocols that sounded impressive on paper. His presence had given them their voices. The difference wasn't about resources. It was about something else entirely. Something Victoria had forgotten how to do somewhere between Michael's funeral and the daily routine of surviving rather than living. Skills don't come from degrees, she remembered Marcus saying to Dr. Chen in one of those security recordings. They come from never giving up on the people you love. Victoria stood, smoothed her skirt, checked her reflection in the window that overlooked Mercer Island's carefully manicured landscape. The woman looking back at her had perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect everything except the eyes. Those told a different story, of someone who'd been running from pain for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. Tomorrow, she would talk to Marcus. She would demand explanations, timelines, detailed accounts of his methods. Tonight, she would lie awake and wonder when she'd stop being her daughter's mother and started being their case manager instead. The address in Redmond took Victoria 45 minutes to reach, traffic on 520 thicker than usual for a Thursday afternoon. She'd told herself she was being ridiculous, that driving to Marcus Reed's apartment complex was a violation of privacy and professional boundaries, and probably several other things her therapist would have strong opinions about. She'd come anyway. Cascade Gardens sat on a street where the gardens part was aspirational at best. 3 buildings arranged in a U-shape around a parking lot that had more potholes than pavement. Peeling paint. Chain link fence separating the property from the convenience store next door. Playground equipment that looked like it had been installed during the Reagan administration and never updated. Victoria parked her Tesla across the street, suddenly very aware of how much her car cost compared to the combined value of every vehicle in that lot. She'd changed out of her work clothes, Armani suit, Louboutin heels, into jeans and a sweater that had cost $500 but at least didn't scream, "I make more in a month than you make in a year." 2:15 in the afternoon. Marcus's schedule, according to the file she definitely shouldn't have memorized, had him working at the apartment complex from 1 to 6. His day off from the Hayes estate. She shouldn't be here. This was stalking. This was invasive. This was wrong on multiple levels. Victoria stayed in the car. At 2:17, a second-floor apartment door opened. Marcus stepped onto the balcony, pushing a small wheelchair. The girl in it, Emma, had to be Emma, had brown curly hair pulled into 2 puffs on either side of her head, secured with pink butterfly clips. She wore a dress covered in more butterflies, the kind of cheerful pattern that suggested someone had put thought into making her feel pretty. Marcus positioned the wheelchair so Emma faced the courtyard, knelt beside her, one hand on the chair's arm, the other pointing down at something Victoria couldn't see from this angle. A bird, maybe, or a flower growing through a crack in the concrete. Emma's eyes followed his hand. Her body was rigid in the chair, locked in the kind of spasticity that made every movement a battle. But her gaze tracked. She was present. She was paying attention. Marcus said something Victoria couldn't hear. Emma's mouth moved, attempt at response, Victoria thought, though from this distance she couldn't be sure. Marcus smiled, touched his daughter's cheek with infinite gentleness, then produced a picture book from somewhere. He read aloud. Victoria was too far away to hear the words, but she could see his mouth moving, see the way he showed Emma each page, even though the girl's body wouldn't allow her to turn pages herself. Every few sentences, Marcus would pause, place Emma's small hand against his chest. The same technique he'd been using with Lily and Rose. Emma tried to smile. It was crooked, effortful, the kind of smile that required muscles that didn't want to cooperate. But it was real. It was joy, unmistakable even from across the street. Marcus kissed the top of his daughter's head, said something that made Emma attempt another sound. Then he carefully wheeled her back inside, one hand still resting on her shoulder, like he couldn't bear not to touch her. Victoria sat in her car and cried. Not the careful, controlled tears she'd allowed herself at Michael's funeral while 200 people watched and judged. Not the quiet, dignified grief she'd permitted in the shower where no one could see. Full, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep she hadn't known it existed. This was love, what she'd just witnessed, not the idea of love, not the performance of love, not love as obligation or duty or responsibility. Just pure, uncomplicated devotion to another human being who needed you. Marcus Reed worked 3 jobs, lived in an apartment that probably had mold in the bathroom and cockroaches in the kitchen, drove a car that was old enough to vote, had medical debt that would take years to pay off, and he spent his day off reading to his daughter on a balcony because she deserved sunshine and stories and someone who saw her as more than a collection of symptoms. Victoria had a mansion, had money she could never spend, had every resource imaginable at her fingertips. And she'd spent the last 8 years hiding in her office, pretending that hiring enough people to care for her daughters meant she was caring for them herself. At 2:40, Marcus emerged from the building again, this time without Emma. He carried a toolbox and headed toward the building on the left. Work, Victoria realized. His job as maintenance for the complex probably involved fixing things during his so-called day off. She watched him stop to help an elderly resident carry groceries upstairs, watched him pause to wave at a group of kids playing basketball in a makeshift court, watched him move through the world with the kind of easy presence that suggested he knew exactly who he was and didn't need anyone's approval to be it. Victoria started her car, drove back to Mercer Island, walked into her empty mansion where 8 staff members ensured everything was perfect and nothing was alive. She went to the therapy room. Lily and Rose were having their afternoon rest period, both asleep in their specialized beds. Victoria stood between them, looking at her daughters, really looking, maybe for the first time since they'd come home from the NICU 8 years ago. They had Michael's nose, Victoria's chin, a blend of both their coloring. They were beautiful in the way all children are beautiful, but Victoria had spent so long seeing only their disabilities that she'd forgotten to see them. Lily stirred in her sleep, made a small sound. Victoria's breath caught. Was it Mama? Could have been. Or could have been nothing, just the random vocalization of a sleeping child. Victoria would never know because she hadn't been paying attention, hadn't been present, had hired other people to notice things like whether her daughters made sounds in their sleep. She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Lily's hand. The girl didn't wake, didn't react. But Victoria kept her hand there anyway, feeling the warmth of skin against skin, the pulse of life that she'd been too afraid to fully acknowledge. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I haven't been here." No response, no absolution, just 2 sleeping children who deserved better than a mother who treated motherhood like a project to be managed from a distance. Victoria stood there until her legs ached. Then she went to her office, opened her laptop, and started researching cerebral palsy treatment, not from medical journals and expensive consultants, but from parent forums and disability rights organizations and people who actually live this reality every day. She read until midnight, learned things she should have known years ago, discovered a whole world of knowledge that existed outside the sterile confines of medical expertise, practical wisdom from people who understood that disability wasn't a problem to be solved, but a different way of being human. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Victoria fell asleep at her desk, her last conscious thought being that tomorrow she would talk to Marcus Reed and try to understand how he'd managed to do in 8 weeks what she'd failed to do in 8 years. She would ask him to teach her how to be present for her own children. And if he was willing, she would learn. Friday afternoon light filtered through the therapy room windows, like it was trying hard not to disturb anyone. Victoria stood just inside the doorway, palms damp against her skirt, watching Dr. Chen prepare Lily and Rose for what the schedule called interactive engagement time. She'd spent the previous night researching, reading forum posts from parents who described breakthrough moments, learning that consistency mattered more than credentials, understanding, finally, that her daughters needed her presence more than her checkbook. Now came the hard part, actually being present. "May I?" Victoria's voice came out smaller than intended. Dr. Chen looked up, surprise flickering across her features before professionalism smoothed it away. "Of course, Mrs. Hayes, they'd love that." Would they? Victoria wasn't sure love was the right word for what Lily and Rose might feel about a woman who visited them on a schedule maintained by other people. She pulled a chair between the wheelchairs, sat down, tried to remember what Marcus had done in all those security recordings. Just talk. Just be there. Simple, except nothing about this felt simple when your own children looked at you like a stranger who happened to live in the same house. "Hello, my loves, it's Mommy." The words felt foreign in her mouth. When had she last called herself that? When had she last attempted more than a brief check-in before disappearing back into her office where numbers and portfolios made sense? Lily's eyes drifted past her shoulder. Rose stared at the ceiling. Victoria tried again, reaching for Lily's hand. "Can you hear Mommy?" Nothing. No response. No recognition. 8 years of absence couldn't be erased by one afternoon of sudden maternal attention. The tightness in Victoria's chest spread. She'd known this would be difficult, but understanding something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were different countries entirely. She attempted to sing Michael's lullaby, the one from his notebook, the one Marcus had somehow found and used. But her voice came out wrong, too formal, too careful, missing whatever warmth Marcus brought to the melody. She sounded like someone performing rather than someone who meant it. Lily turned her head away, not dramatically, just a small movement that communicated everything Victoria needed to know about how this was going. Dr. Chen moved closer, compassion in her voice. They've been restless all day, ma'am. Marcus usually handles afternoon reading, but he's cleaning the West Wing. Marcus. Of course. The girls were waiting for him, not her. Could you? Victoria paused, pride warring with desperation. Could you ask him to come here? 10 minutes later, Marcus entered, still wearing damp work gloves from scrubbing bathroom tile. His hair stuck up where he'd run his hands through it, and there was a smudge of cleaning solution on his sleeve. He looked tired. He looked underpaid. He looked like someone Victoria should have noticed weeks ago. The transformation in Lily and Rose was immediate. Fingers that had been still began to curl and uncurl. Eyes that had been vacant suddenly tracked toward the door. Rose made a sound, not a word, but intentional vocalization that meant something in whatever language she and Marcus had developed together. Marcus pulled off his gloves, tucked them in his back pocket, and knelt between the wheelchairs with the ease of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. He didn't acknowledge Victoria. All his attention focused on the girls. Hey there, sweethearts. Sorry I'm late. Had to make Mrs. Peterson's bathroom sparkle. His voice carried warmth that Victoria's hadn't managed. Want to practice our humming? He placed one hand on Lily's chest, the other on Rose's. Started humming a low note that Victoria felt more than heard. The girls' bodies vibrated with it. Lily's mouth opened slightly, attempting to mimic the sound. Rose's fingers reached toward Marcus's arm. That's it. Feel that? That's what voices do. They live right here. He tapped Lily's sternum gently, just waiting to come out and say hello to the world. Victoria watched, cataloging every detail. The pressure of his touch, firm enough to be felt through their limited sensory processing. Gentle enough not to overwhelm. The way he made eye contact with each girl in turn, treating them as individuals rather than a matched set. How he explained what he was doing as if they could understand every word, because maybe they could, and who was he to assume otherwise? May I try? The question escaped before Victoria could stop it. Marcus glanced at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, but close. He nodded, gestured to Rose. Place your hand here. Flat palm, steady pressure. Then hum from your chest, not your throat. Victoria moved forward, hyper-aware of how expensive her watch was compared to Marcus's frayed uniform cuffs. She positioned her hand where he'd indicated. Rose's chest felt small and fragile beneath her palm, ribs too prominent, heartbeat rapid and bird quick. She tried to hum. The sound came out thin, uncertain. Deeper, Marcus coached, like you're trying to make your whole body into a drum. Victoria tried again, better this time, though nothing like the resonance Marcus achieved. But Rose's fingers twitched. Not much, not dramatic, but movement, response. The first physical acknowledgement Victoria had received from her daughter in longer than she could remember. Tears burned her eyes. She blinked them back, kept humming, felt the small vibration against her palm, and thought about all the moments she'd missed, all the progress she'd delegated to others, all the ways she'd failed to show up for the two people who needed her most. Marcus watched her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held no judgment, just quiet certainty. You can't buy trust with money, Mrs. Hayes. Trust is built from small moments, repeated every single day until it becomes something you can count on. Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, wanted to explain about grief and trauma, and how sometimes the only way to survive losing someone you loved was to make sure you never loved that completely again. But Rose's fingers had closed around her thumb, a grip so weak Victoria barely felt it. But there, real, permission to try. Teach me, she managed. Everything you know. I need to learn how to be their mother again. Marcus studied her, weighing something Victoria couldn't see. Then he nodded. Tomorrow, same time. Bring patience, that's all you'll need. The weather alert came through on Marcus's phone at 3:45 while he was halfway through mopping the second-floor hallway. Pacific storm system approaching Puget Sound. Winds 70 miles per hour expected. Power outages likely. Stay indoors after 6 p.m. His stomach dropped. Emma hated storms. The thunder triggered something primal in her, sent her into seizures if the stress got bad enough. And his apartment's backup generator had stopped working 2 months ago, something he'd been meaning to fix but hadn't found time or money for yet. He needed to get home. Now, but downstairs in the therapy room, Lily and Rose were growing increasingly agitated. Chen had mentioned it when Marcus passed by. The barometric pressure shift affected them the way it affected Emma. They could feel weather changes in their bodies, some hypersensitivity that made them anxious even when they couldn't articulate why. Marcus checked his watch. 4 o'clock. Emma's daytime caregiver wouldn't leave until 5:30. He had 90 minutes. If he stayed with Lily and Rose until 4:30, he could still make it back to Redmond before the storm hit. Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs, phone pressed to her ear, finishing some business call that involved phrases like market volatility and hedge position. She ended the call, noticed Marcus standing there with his mop bucket. The storm. You should leave early. Get home to Emma before it hits. So she'd been paying attention, knew his daughter's name, actually seemed concerned. The girls are restless, Marcus heard himself say. They can sense the pressure dropping. If I could just stay until 4:30. Go now. Victoria's voice held unexpected firmness. I'll stay with them. Mrs. Hayes, with respect, they're already on edge. A change in routine right now might... I said I'd learn. Might as well start. She moved past him toward the stairs. Go take care of your daughter, Marcus. I'll manage mine. He wanted to argue. The girls needed consistency, especially when they were already stressed. But Emma needed him more, and every minute he delayed was a minute closer to being stuck on Highway 520 when the storm made the bridge impassable. Marcus set down his mop bucket. They responded deep humming, and the lullaby from Mr. Hayes's notebook. They know it now. If things get really bad, just be there. That's the most important part. Victoria nodded, already descending the stairs. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for his car, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Traffic on 520 was already backing up. Marcus merged into the slow lane, watched dark clouds build over Lake Washington like bruises spreading across skin. His phone buzzed, Emma's caregiver. Mr. Reed, the weather alert has me worried. I can stay late if you need... I'm on my way. 20 minutes. Optimistic estimate, given the car's barely moving in front of him. Emma's getting anxious. She keeps looking at the windows. Because Emma understood more than people gave her credit for. She knew storms meant danger, meant darkness, meant her father stressed and scared, and she fed off his anxiety the way flowers feed off sunlight. Put the phone near her, let me talk to her. Rustling sounds. Then Emma's breathing, rapid and shallow. Hey, baby girl, it's Daddy. I know you're scared, but I'm coming home, okay? You're safe. Maria's there with you. Just breathe with me. In and out. That's my girl. Emma made a sound. Half whimper, half attempt at dada. Marcus's throat tightened. I'll be there soon, I promise. Just hold on for me. The bridge was slowing to a crawl now. Marcus checked his rearview mirror, saw nothing but brake lights stretching back toward Mercer Island. Checked ahead and saw the same thing pointing toward Redmond, trapped in the middle while the sky turned the color of old iron. His phone rang. Victoria. Marcus? The girls are crying, both of them. I've never heard them cry like this. Because they were terrified and didn't understand why, and the one person who'd taught them they could trust someone wasn't there. I'm stuck in traffic. Bridge is at a standstill. Marcus tried to keep panic out of his voice. Failed. Can you put the phone near them? On speaker? You're not coming back? I can't. The bridge, they're talking about closing it completely. I won't make it. Silence on the other end. Then, what do I do? Everything Marcus had been teaching her for one afternoon distilled into crisis mode. No time for gradual learning curves. No room for hesitation. Put the phone between their chairs. Let them hear my voice. I'll talk them through it. More rustling, then the sound of storm wind already picking up around the Hayes estate, and beneath it, the heartbreaking sound of two children sobbing. Lily, Rose, it's Marcus. I hear you, sweethearts. I know you're scared. The crying didn't stop, but it shifted. They were listening. I can't be there right now, but your mommy is. She's right there with you, and she's not going anywhere. She's going to keep you safe. Marcus closed his eyes, still trapped in unmoving traffic, and started singing. Michael's lullaby, the one he had found in that notebook and used 100 times since. His voice came through the phone speaker, tinny and distorted, fighting against storm wind and thunder starting to rumble in the distance. But it was his voice. And slowly, so slowly, the girl's crying began to quiet. Mrs. Hayes? Marcus opened his eyes, focused on the road, even though nothing was moving. You still there? Yes, her voice sounded wrecked. I need you to do something for me. When I stop singing, you're going to start. The same song. They know it now. They'll recognize it. Marcus, I can't. You can. You have to. They need to hear you choose to be there for them. He sang through two more verses, feeling the absurdity of the situation, conducting a long-distance therapy session from the middle of a traffic jam while his own daughter sat terrified in an apartment 20 minutes away. But he kept going because Lily and Rose were breathing more steadily now, and Victoria needed to understand what actual presence required. When he reached the end of the song, he stopped. Your turn, Mrs. Hayes. Don't think about it. Just sing. Static. Storm sounds. Then Victoria's voice, shaky at first but growing stronger, picking up the melody Marcus had left hanging in the air. The girls quieted completely, listening, processing, beginning to understand that maybe their mother could be counted on after all. I have to go, Marcus managed. Emma needs me, but you can do this. Just keep singing, keep being there. That's all they need. He ended the call before Victoria could protest. Immediately dialed Emma's caregiver back, learned his daughter was hyperventilating, learned the storm was picking up faster than predicted, learned he was still 15 minutes away in traffic that wasn't moving. The rain started, not gradual, just sudden sheets of water that turned Highway 520 into a river with cars as obstacles. Marcus's windshield wipers couldn't keep up. He gripped the steering wheel and tried not to imagine all the ways this night could go catastrophically wrong. Victoria stood between two crying children with a phone in her hand and a song she hadn't sung in 7 years, sitting heavy on her tongue. The house lights flickered, died. Emergency generator kicked in with a hum that did nothing to mask the storm now battering the windows. She should call Dr. Chen from her room, should activate whatever crisis protocol existed for situations like this, should do anything except stand here alone with daughters she barely knew how to comfort. Instead, she started singing. The words felt rusty. Her voice cracked on the second line. But she pushed through, remembering how Michael used to sing this to her pregnant belly, how he'd promised their daughters would know his voice before they knew his face, how he'd been so certain love was enough to build a family on. He'd been wrong. Love needed presence. Love needed showing up even when, especially when it was hard. Lily's crying hitched. Rose's breathing started to slow. They were listening. Actually listening, to her. Victoria knelt between the wheelchairs, still singing, and placed one hand on each daughter's chest the way Marcus had shown her. Felt their hearts racing, their lungs working too hard, their small bodies fighting against fear they couldn't name. I'm here, she whispered between verses. Mommy's here. I'm not going anywhere. Rose's hand moved, found Victoria's wrist, held on with a grip that wouldn't have restrained a butterfly, but meant everything in the context of a child who'd never before reached for her mother voluntarily. The tears came then. Victoria let them fall while she sang, while she held her daughters, while the storm raged outside and the emergency lights cast strange shadows, and everything that had been broken for 8 years started, just barely, to mend. She sang until her throat hurt, sang until Lily's eyes drifted closed, sang until Rose's breathing evened out into something approaching sleep, sang until she heard Michael's voice in her memory, not as grief, but as permission to finally be the mother these girls deserved. When both daughters had fallen asleep, Victoria stayed kneeling on the floor between them. Her knees ached. Her back protested. She didn't care. This was the first time in 8 years she'd been present for a crisis without delegating it to someone else. And the fact that she'd barely managed it didn't matter as much as the fact that she'd tried. Her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. How are they? Victoria typed with one hand, the other still resting on Rose's chest. Asleep. Safe. I sang to them. Thank you for teaching me how. Three dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally. You did that yourself. I just reminded you it was possible. But they both knew that wasn't quite true. Marcus had done more than remind her. He'd shown her what real presence looked like when you stripped away money and credentials and everything else that created distance between parents and children. Victoria looked at her sleeping daughters and whispered into the darkness, I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry I let fear keep me away. I'm here now. I promise I'm here now. Thunder rolled overhead. The emergency lights flickered but held. And for the first time since Michael's funeral, Victoria Hayes stayed exactly where she was instead of running back to an office where grief couldn't follow. The call came 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was replacing a broken window latch in the Hayes estate's guest bedroom. Emma's school, their voice urgent in a way that made Marcus's hands go numb. Mr. Reed, Emma had a seizure. We've called 911. She's on her way to Harborview. Marcus dropped his screwdriver, didn't bother picking it up, just ran. He found Victoria in her office, burst in without knocking, probably violated a dozen unspoken rules about boundaries. Emma, hospital. I have to go. Victoria stood immediately. Take my car. Keys are in my bag. Go. The girls. I'll handle them. Go. Marcus grabbed the keys, registered distantly that she was handing him access to a $70,000 vehicle, didn't have time to process what that meant. Just ran to the circular driveway where Victoria's Tesla sat gleaming and new and completely foreign to someone who'd driven nothing but his failing Honda for 15 years. The car started with a whisper. Marcus pulled out faster than he should have, trying to remember how to work the touchscreen while navigating toward downtown Seattle. Traffic was light. He made it to Harborview in 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Pediatric ICU, 4th floor. Emma in a bed surrounded by monitors, EEG leads attached to her scalp. Oxygen saturation alarm beeping because her levels kept dropping. The neurologist on duty was young, competent, clearly exhausted. Mr. Reed, Emma's stable now. The seizure lasted 4 minutes, longer than her previous episodes. We're running tests to determine the trigger. Marcus barely heard him. All his attention focused on Emma's face, pale against white sheets, her small body looking even smaller, surrounded by hospital equipment. He moved to the bedside, took her hand. Hey, baby girl, Daddy's here. Emma's eyes opened, tried to focus. Her mouth worked soundlessly, attempting his name and not quite managing it. The neurologist cleared his throat. We need to talk about her current medication protocol. The Keppra isn't controlling the seizures adequately anymore. I'd recommend switching to a newer anti-epileptic, Briviact. It's shown better efficacy in cases like Emma's. Okay. Marcus would have agreed to anything that kept his daughter safer. When can we start? There's a complication. Her insurance doesn't cover Briviact yet. It's still relatively new. Out-of-pocket cost would be around $950 monthly. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. $950 on top of the $800 he already paid. On top of rent and food and Emma's caregiver and the medical debt he was already drowning in. I'll find a way. His voice came out steady even though his hands were shaking. Whatever she needs. The neurologist nodded, made a note in Emma's chart, and left them alone. Marcus sat in the uncomfortable chair next to Emma's bed and tried to do math that didn't work. 3 jobs, $42,000 a year, already stretched past breaking. Where was he supposed to find another $2,000 annually? Pick up more hours. Except he was already working 60 hours a week and that still left him short. Take a 4th job. Except then who would care for Emma? She needed him, needed the stability of his presence, needed more than just someone making sure she didn't choke on her food. His phone buzzed. Victoria. How is she? Stable. Needs new medication that insurance won't cover. $950 a month. 3 dots appeared. Stayed there for a long time. Finally, let me help. I can cover it. And there it was. The offer Marcus had known was coming from the moment he'd burst into Victoria's office. The solution that made logical sense from every angle except the one that mattered. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. It would be so easy. Just type yes and solve the immediate crisis. Let someone with resources help someone without them. Except that sometimes pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. But if he said yes to this, what came next? More help, more assistance, more ways Victoria's wealth could paper over problems until Marcus wasn't supporting his daughter anymore. He was just the person who showed up while someone else's money kept Emma alive. He'd spent 6 years since Nicole left, proving he could do this alone. Could be enough for Emma even when the world insisted a single father without resources couldn't possibly provide adequate care. Every time he'd accepted help, people had looked at him with pity that felt like judgment. Poor Marcus. Can't hack it. Needs charity to keep his kid alive. No, he typed it fast before he could reconsider. Thank you, but no, I'll handle it. Victoria's response came immediately. Marcus, this is ridiculous. I have the money. Emma needs the medication. Let me help. I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Hayes, but Emma is my daughter. My responsibility. I'll figure it out. He turned off his phone before Victoria could argue further. Sat with Emma for the next 6 hours while doctors ran tests and nurses checked vitals, and his daughter slept through the kind of exhausted recovery that came after her brain had misfired badly enough to seize. Around 8 p.m., the door opened. Marcus looked up, expecting another nurse. Found Victoria instead, still in her work clothes, carrying a bag from a nearby deli. You haven't eaten. She set the bag on the rolling tray. Basic sandwich and coffee. Nothing fancy. Mrs. Hayes, you didn't need to stop. Victoria pulled a second chair from the corner, sat. You've been helping my daughters for almost 3 months. The least I can do is bring you dinner. Marcus wanted to argue. Couldn't find the energy. He opened the bag, found a turkey sandwich that was probably $8 but tasted like cardboard because everything tasted like cardboard when your kid was in the hospital. Victoria watched Emma sleep. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. When Michael died, people kept offering help. Money, mostly. They'd say things like, anything you need, but what they meant was, I'll write a check so I don't have to feel uncomfortable about your grief. It made me angry, like they thought money could fix the fact that my husband was gone. Marcus chewed mechanically, waited. But then the girls came home from the NICU, and I started hiring people. Nurses, therapists, specialists. I told myself I was getting them the best care. Really, I was just avoiding being present for their needs, because being present meant acknowledging how broken everything was. She paused. I threw money at problems because money was easier than showing up. Mrs. Hayes, let me finish. You've taught me over these past weeks that presence matters more than resources, that my daughters needed me, not my checkbook. And you're right about that. You've been right about everything regarding Lily and Rose. She turned to look at him. But you're wrong about Emma. With respect, taking help isn't the same as being bought. It's not charity, it's community. It's people who have resources helping people who need them. And that's okay. That's how families work. That's how any functional society works. Marcus set down his sandwich. Emma is my daughter. I take care of her. Of course you do. No one's questioning that. But Marcus, you work 3 jobs. You're exhausted. You're 1 car repair or medical emergency away from financial collapse. And Emma deserves better than watching her father kill himself out of pride. The words hit harder because they were true. Marcus was exhausted. He was 1 crisis away from losing everything. He'd been running on fumes and determination for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have reserves. But accepting help from Victoria Hayes meant admitting he couldn't do this alone. Meant acknowledging that love and dedication weren't enough when your daughter needed $900 medication and you made $42,000 a year. I can't. His voice came out rough. If I start taking your money, where does it stop? You pay for Emma's medication, then what? Her equipment? Her caregiver? At what point does she stop being my daughter and start being another one of your charity cases? Victoria flinched. Is that what you think Lily and Rose are? Charity cases? No, they're your daughters. You're their mother. That's completely different. How? How's it different? You've given my daughter something money couldn't buy. Now I'm offering to help your daughter in the way I can. That's not charity. That's reciprocity. Marcus wanted to keep arguing, wanted to hold on to his pride, his independence, his certainty that he could handle anything if he just worked hard enough. But Emma lay in a hospital bed needing medication he couldn't afford, and his pride wasn't going to prevent her next seizure. He put his head in his hands. I don't know how to accept help without feeling like I've failed. Maybe that's something you need to learn. Victoria's voice gentled. The same way I needed to learn how to be present instead of distant. They sat in silence while Emma slept and monitors beeped and Marcus's entire understanding of self-sufficiency cracked around the edges. Charlie found Marcus in the staff break room the next morning, sitting with cold coffee and the kind of expression that suggested he'd slept in a hospital chair and hated every decision that had led there. Heard about Emma. She okay? Stable. They're keeping her another day for observation. Marcus rubbed his eyes. New medication needed. Insurance won't cover it. I'm trying to figure out how to pay for it without accepting charity from Mrs. Hayes. Charlie pulled out a chair, sat down with the heaviness of someone who had things to say and knew they wouldn't be well received. You're an idiot, hermano. Thanks. Really helpful. You know what your problem is? Pride. You've got so much pride you'd rather let your daughter suffer than accept help from someone who can afford to give it. It's not about pride. It's about pride. Charlie's voice held no judgment, just weary certainty. And I know because I had the same problem. My wife, Maria, she got cancer 12 years ago. Stage 3. Doctor said she needed aggressive treatment, stuff our insurance barely covered. Out-of-pocket costs were going to be over $200,000. Marcus looked up. Charlie had never mentioned this. My brother, he's a software engineer, makes ridiculous money. He offered to help, said he'd cover whatever insurance didn't. And you know what I did? I said no. Told him I'd handle it myself, because accepting help felt like admitting I couldn't provide for my own wife. Charlie's hands tightened around his coffee cup. So I worked double shifts, picked up side jobs, tried to pay for treatments while they were happening. But it wasn't enough, and I was too proud to go back to my brother and admit I needed him. By the time I finally asked, it was too late. Cancer had progressed. Maria died 3 months later. The break room felt too small suddenly, too quiet. The doctor said if we'd started the full treatment protocol 6 months earlier, she probably would have survived. 6 months. That's what my pride cost me. Charlie met Marcus's eyes. Don't make my mistake, hermano. Don't let pride kill someone you love. Marcus's throat tightened. It's different. Mrs. Hayes isn't family. She's my employer. No, she's a woman you've been teaching how to be a better mother to her kids. A woman who's trying to return the favor by helping your kid. That's not employment. That's community. Charlie, you think accepting help makes you weak? It doesn't. Strength isn't never needing anybody. Strength is knowing when to let people who care about you actually care. Charlie stood. Mrs. Hayes isn't offering charity. She's offering partnership. And if you're too stubborn to see the difference, then you're not half as smart as I thought you were. He left Marcus alone with cold coffee and a truth that hurt to acknowledge. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you couldn't do everything alone. Marcus thought about Emma, about the seizures that were getting worse, about medication that could help if he'd just swallow his pride long enough to accept it, about the difference between being bought and being helped. He thought about Victoria learning to be present for Lily and Rose, about how hard that must have been for a woman who had spent 8 years using money as a buffer against pain, about how she'd shown up anyway, humbled herself anyway, admitted she needed teaching. Maybe it was his turn to be humble, his turn to admit that love, real love, the kind that put Emma's needs ahead of his ego, meant accepting help when it was offered with genuine care rather than condescension. Marcus pulled out his phone, typed a message to Victoria before he could talk himself out of it. Can we talk about your offer? And maybe about something bigger. Her response came within seconds. My office, 2 o'clock, bring an open mind. Marcus stared at his phone, then texted back. Only if you promise this isn't charity. It's not charity, Marcus. It's family helping family. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth believing in. Victoria's office at 2 p.m. felt different than it had 3 months ago. The same mahogany desk, same leather chair, same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking water that never stopped moving. But the woman sitting behind that desk had changed in ways that couldn't be measured by quarterly reports. Marcus arrived exactly on time, still in his work uniform because he'd come straight from the hospital. Emma was stable, discharged that morning with instructions to follow up in a week. He'd left her with her caregiver and driven Victoria's Tesla back to Mercer Island, hyper-aware the entire time that he was operating a vehicle worth more than everything he owned combined. Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. Marcus sat, noticed she'd moved the chair closer than it used to be. Less interrogation, more conversation. "I've been thinking about what you need." Victoria opened a folder, slid papers across the desk. "And what I need? I'd like to propose something that benefits both our families." Marcus scanned the documents. Employment contract. Job title, Family Care Coordinator. Salary, $78,000 annually. Benefits package including health insurance with prescription coverage that specifically listed Briviact as a covered medication pending prior authorization. Housing, West Wing apartment, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, utilities included, valued at $35,000 annually. His hands went numb reading the numbers. This wasn't a job offer. This was a complete restructuring of his life. "This is too much. It's market rate for specialized pediatric care." Victoria's voice was steady, businesslike in a way that suggested she'd rehearsed this. "I researched comparable positions. PT aides with your experience and specialization in nonverbal children with neuromuscular disorders command 70 to 85,000 in private care settings. I'm not inventing numbers to make you feel better about accepting. But the apartment, I have 8 bedrooms in this house. 6 are empty. Michael's parents visit twice a year and stay for a weekend. That's it. The rest of the time, I'm paying to heat and maintain space no one uses." She leaned forward slightly. "It's wasteful. And frankly, having Emma here means she has immediate access to Dr. Chen, to the therapy equipment I've already purchased, to the same level of medical monitoring my daughters receive." Marcus set the papers down carefully, as if they might explode. "Mrs. Hayes, you're trying to buy me. I'm trying to hire you for a position that actually exists and needs filling. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels like you're using money to paper over the uncomfortable fact that the janitor can do something for your kids that you couldn't, that all your expensive therapists couldn't." Victoria's jaw tightened. The corporate mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. "You think I'm trying to ease my guilt by throwing resources at you? Aren't you?" The silence stretched taut between them. Victoria stood, walked to the window, her back rigid. When she spoke, her voice had lost its careful business tone. "Yes, partly. You're absolutely right." She turned to face him, and Marcus saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "When Michael died, I built walls around myself, hired people to do what I was too terrified to do myself. Loved my children without reservation, without the constant fear that I might lose them the way I lost him." Marcus waited, sensing she needed to finish. "Every therapist I hired, every piece of equipment I bought, every structured schedule I implemented, it was all a way to convince myself I was being a good mother while keeping enough distance that it wouldn't destroy me if something happened to them." Victoria moved back toward the desk, but didn't sit. "You showed me what a parent who never gives up actually looks like. You shamed me just by existing, by being present for Emma no matter what it cost you." "That wasn't my intention." "I know. That's what makes it worse. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were just being a father." She finally sat, met his eyes directly. "This offer is partly about my guilt. I won't lie about that. But Marcus, it's also about my daughters deserving the best care possible. And right now, objectively, you provide that care better than anyone else I could hire. Until you don't need me anymore. Then what? I've become dependent on your salary, your housing, and suddenly I'm back where I started, except now I can't afford to leave. Then we make it a contract, 2 years, renewable by mutual agreement. If it doesn't work, if you decide this arrangement isn't right for you and Emma, or if I somehow revert to my old patterns and you need to leave, You get 3 months severance. That gives you time to find another position, build savings, get stable. Marcus picked up the papers again, forced himself to read past the salary numbers to the actual terms. Health insurance that would cover Emma's seizure medications completely. Dental and vision, a 401k with employer matching. 2 weeks paid vacation that he could actually take because Emma would be in the same building, cared for by people he trusted. All the things he'd been trying to provide through 3 jobs and chronic exhaustion. All the things that remained just out of reach no matter how hard he worked. His daughter could have the treatment she needed, could live in a safe environment with medical supervision readily available, could have stability instead of watching her father slowly kill himself trying to be enough. All Marcus had to do was accept that he couldn't provide those things alone, that his love and dedication, while genuine, weren't sufficient when your daughter needed medication that cost $1,000 monthly and you made $42,000 a year. I have a condition. The words came out harder than he intended, defensive. Victoria's expression didn't change. Name it. You have to be present, actually genuinely present. Not just hire me and disappear back into your office like you've delegated the problem away. I've been present every day for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks isn't nearly 8 years, Marcus leaned forward. Lily and Rose need their mother, not another paid caregiver, even if that caregiver is well compensated. If I'm going to accept this position, you have to commit to showing up, learning the techniques I use, practicing them daily, singing to the girls every single night, even when you're exhausted from board meetings. Victoria's hands tightened on the desk edge. That's what scares me most. What if I really try, and still fail? What if I'm present and consistent, and they still don't connect with me the way they connect with you? Then you keep trying anyway, because that's what parents do. We show up even when we're scared it won't be enough. She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. 2 years minimum. I show up every single day. You teach me everything you know about helping them. And both our daughters get the care they actually need instead of the care we can barely manage to provide. Marcus extended his hand across the expensive desk. Not charity, partnership. We're clear on that? Victoria shook firmly. Partnership. We're partners in this. The best contracts aren't written on paper. They're written in gestures of presence, repeated every single day until they become something both people can count on. Charlie Mendoza found Marcus in the staff break room late that afternoon, sitting alone with coffee gone cold, and the kind of expression that suggested a man wrestling with decisions that would change everything. Heard Mrs. Hayes made you an offer. The real kind, not just words. Charlie pulled out a chair, sat down with the easy familiarity of someone who'd earned the right to insert himself into other people's problems. You gonna take it? I don't know. Marcus rubbed his face. $78,000, full benefits, an apartment. It's more than I ever imagined making. Sounds like a yes to me. Or it sounds like I'm being bought, like I'm admitting I failed at taking care of my own daughter. Charlie was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight that made Marcus look up. You know what your problem is, hermano? Pride. You've got so much pride wrapped up in doing everything yourself that you'd rather let your daughter suffer than accept help from someone who can afford to give it. It's not pride. It's about maintaining my dignity, about being able to look Emma in the eye and know I provided for her. And I know that feeling because I had the same damn problem 12 years ago. Charlie's jaw tightened. Maria, my wife, she got diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. Doctors laid out the treatment plan: aggressive chemo, radiation, experimental drugs. Our insurance covered maybe 60%. Out-of-pocket costs were going to hit $200,000, maybe more. Marcus had never heard Charlie mention this. In all the months working together, the older man had talked about his daughters, his grandkids, his passion for authentic Mexican food. Never about losing his wife. My brother Luis, he's a software architect at Amazon, makes the kind of money that sounds made up. He came to me the day after Maria's diagnosis, said he'd cover whatever insurance didn't. Every penny, said that's what family does. Charlie's hands clenched around his coffee cup. And you know what I did? I said no. Told him thanks, but I'd handle it myself. because accepting his money felt like admitting I couldn't provide for my own wife. The break room felt too small suddenly, too quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. So I worked doubles, picked up side jobs doing electrical work on weekends, tried to pay for the treatments while they were happening, always running 2 months behind, always scrambling. Charlie's voice went rough, but it wasn't enough. And I was too goddamn proud to go back to Luis and admit I needed him after I'd already refused. By the time I finally broke down and asked, 6 months later, the cancer had progressed. Treatment that might have worked in stage 3 didn't work in stage 4. Marcus felt his throat close. Maria died 3 months after I finally accepted help. The oncologist told me later that if we'd been able to start the full treatment and protocol immediately, if we hadn't had those 6-month delays while I was trying to scrape together payments, she probably would have survived. 70% chance, he said. Charlie finally looked up, eyes red. 6 months. That's what my pride cost me. That's what being too stubborn to accept help from family took from both of us. Charlie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know because I don't talk about it. Because living with that guilt is something I carry alone. And most days I manage to function anyway. He pushed his coffee aside. But I'm telling you now because I don't want you to make my mistake. Don't let pride kill someone you love, hermano. But Mrs. Hayes isn't family. She's my employer. Is she? Is she? Because from where I sit, she's a woman you've been teaching how to actually be a mother to her kids. A woman who's trying to return that gift by helping your kid get the care she needs. That's not an employment transaction. That's community. That's what people who care about each other do. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to hold on to his certainty that accepting help meant admitting failure. But Emma's face appeared in his mind, her struggling through seizures that new medication could prevent, living in an apartment that barely met her needs because it was what he could afford, watching her father work himself toward an early grave out of stubborn pride. You think accepting help makes you weak? Charlie's voice gentled. It doesn't. Strength isn't never needing anybody. Real strength is knowing when to let people who actually care about you provide that care. It's having the courage to admit you can't do everything alone, even when every bone in your body wants to prove you can. What if I accept and then regret it? What if Emma gets used to this life and then something happens and we lose it? What if you don't accept and Emma has another seizure that the right medication could have prevented? What if you're so busy working 3 jobs that you're not there when she really needs you? Charlie stood, put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The risk of trying and maybe losing is better than the certainty of slowly destroying yourself and calling it independence. He left Marcus alone with those words and a truth that burned. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you needed help. Sometimes love meant swallowing your pride long enough to let someone else carry part of the weight you'd been shouldering alone. Marcus pulled out his phone, typed a message to Victoria before he could rationalize his way out of it. I'll take the position. When do you want me to start? Her response came within seconds. You already have. We're just making it official now. 4 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when Seattle briefly remembered what sunshine looked like, Charlie helped Marcus load the last box into a borrowed pickup truck. Most of Marcus's possessions had already made the trip to Mercer Island earlier in the week. Furniture, Emma's medical equipment, the accumulation of 9 years lived in spaces too small for the life contained within them. That's everything, hermano. Charlie secured the final strap. You're officially moved out. Marcus looked back at the apartment building that had been home since Emma was 3. Peeling paint, cracked parking lot, the playground where Emma had learned to operate her wheelchair well enough to chase other kids even if her body couldn't keep up. It had been cramped and occasionally depressing and never quite warm enough in winter. It had also been his, the place he'd built for Emma through his own work, his own choices. Now he was leaving it for a mansion where someone else made the mortgage payments. Emma sat in the truck's passenger seat, humming to herself, unusually animated for a child who normally struggled with transitions. She'd visited the Hayes estate 3 times over the past month, had met Lily and Rose during carefully supervised introductions that had gone better than Marcus had dared hope. You ready, baby girl? Emma made a sound that approximated ready, and smiled her crooked smile. The drive to Mercer Island felt different this time. Not a commute to work, but a journey towards something Marcus didn't quite have words for yet. When he pulled into the service entrance, old habit, Victoria was waiting there with Dr. Bum. Chen, both women looking unexpectedly nervous for people who lived in a mansion and possessed every advantage. Marcus parked, helped Emma into her wheelchair. She looked up at the house with eyes that took in everything. The perfectly maintained grounds, the fountain that probably cost more than 3 months of Marcus's old rent, the sheer scale of a building designed to announce wealth. Victoria knelt smoothly to Emma's eye level, her Armani jeans already showing dirt from the garden where she'd been attempting to plant vegetables with mixed results. "Hello, Emma. I'm Victoria. I'm very happy you're here. Really, genuinely happy." Emma studied this woman who her father had been talking about for weeks. Processed the kind tone, the genuine smile, the fact that she'd knelt in dirt to meet Emma's eyes instead of standing over her. Then miraculously, Vic-Ria. Not perfect. The hard consonants gave Emma trouble. Always would. But close enough that Victoria's eyes went wide with delighted surprise. "Yes, that's right. Victoria, you're so smart, Emma." She glanced up at Marcus, wonder evident in her expression. Does she usually learn names that quickly? When she decides she likes someone, Marcus felt something tight in his chest begin to ease. Means she approves of you. "I'm honored." Victoria stood, gestured toward the house. "Lily and Rose have been asking about her all morning. Well, asking in their way. Lots of sounds and pointing at the door." They moved through the service entrance into hallways Marcus had cleaned 100 times, but never imagined walking through as something other than staff. The West Wing apartment waited with his door open, sunlight streaming through windows that faced east across Lake Washington. Someone, probably Victoria, had set up Emma's room with care that showed actual thought. The medical equipment from their old apartment sat assembled and functional, but new additions had appeared. Adaptive toys Emma could operate with limited hand movement, a specialized mattress that would help prevent pressure sores, curtains in soft purple that Emma had mentioned liking once in passing, a detail Marcus hadn't even remembered, but apparently Victoria had noted. "If anything's wrong, we can change it." Victoria hovered in the doorway. "I wasn't sure about the placement of everything." "It's perfect." Marcus meant it. Better than perfect. Better than anything he could have created alone. Emma made a sound of contentment, her eyes tracking around the room that was hers now. Space that wasn't shared with medical equipment crowding a living room. Windows that showed trees instead of asphalt. A door she could close for privacy. Dada, home. Two words that hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. Because yes, this was home now. Not the place he'd scraped together through 3 jobs and constant financial stress. This place where someone else owned everything but had invited them in anyway. Dr. Chen appeared with Lily and Rose in their wheelchairs, both girls making excited sounds when they saw Emma. The 3 children had formed a bond during those earlier visits, the recognition of others who understood what it meant to live in bodies that didn't cooperate. Victoria helped Marcus position the wheelchairs in a triangle, all 3 girls facing each other. For a long moment, they simply looked. Then Lily extended a finger toward Emma. Emma reached back. They touched with infinite care, and something passed between them that needed no words. Rose contributed her own sound. Friend? Emma's attempt at a nod worked better than usual. Friend. Friends. These 3 girls who'd each spent years in isolation, who'd known the particular loneliness of being different, had found each other. Had formed a community of understanding that no amount of adult intervention could replicate. Marcus looked at Victoria, found her watching the girls with tears streaming unashamedly down her face. "They've never had this." Her voice broke. 8 years of the best therapies money could buy, and they've never had friends who actually understand them. Now they do. All 3 of them. Charlie appeared in the doorway carrying the final boxes, James the butler behind him in casual weekend clothes instead of his usual formal attire. Between them, they brought in the last of Marcus's life from Redmond, setting everything down with care that suggested they understood the significance of this moment. "This is it, Hermanoctum." Charlie pulled Marcus into a brief hug. "You made the right choice. Don't ever doubt that." Thanks for helping. That's what family does. Charlie stepped back, winked. Besides, now I get to say I helped you move into a mansion. Makes me sound way more connected than I actually am. 4 months developed their own rhythm, patterns that Marcus hadn't known he was capable of maintaining when he wasn't also juggling 3 jobs and chronic exhaustion. 6 a.m. wake up, helping Emma through her morning routine with the kind of patience that came from actually having slept 7 hours instead of 5. Breakfast in the main kitchen, where the chef had learned Emma's preferences, and Lily and Rose's dietary restrictions without being asked. 7 a.m. meant therapy sessions with all 3 girls together now, something Marcus and Victoria co-led, their partnership evolving from teacher-student into genuine collaboration. Marcus would demonstrate a technique, Victoria would practice it, and gradually she'd begun adding her own insights based on what worked specifically for her daughters. By late January, Lily's vocabulary had expanded to 30 consistent words. Rose managed 25. Emma, thriving in an environment with peers and reduced stress, had pushed her count to 50, and her seizures had completely stopped since starting the Briviact. February brought a change Marcus noticed but didn't comment on. Victoria reduced her work schedule from 60-plus hours weekly to 20. She'd explained it during a board call Marcus had accidentally overheard, telling investors and advisors that her daughters needed her present more than they needed her expanding the portfolio. And if they couldn't respect that priority, she'd resign from active management entirely. No one had challenged her. Victoria Hayes didn't make idle threats. Now she spent mornings in the therapy room, afternoons reading to the girls or helping them with adaptive activities, evenings singing lullabies that no longer wavered with uncertainty. She'd learned to be present not just physically, but emotionally, showing up for her daughters in ways that money had never been able to accomplish. Marcus watched this transformation from someone who'd hired people to care so she wouldn't have to, into someone who couldn't imagine delegating the actual work of motherhood. It was remarkable. It was humbling. It reminded him that change was possible if people wanted it badly enough. March arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that made everyone remember why they'd stayed in Seattle despite the weather. Marcus sat in the corner of the therapy room, notebook in hand, while Victoria ran the entire morning session alone. She positioned Lily and Rose with practiced care, knew exactly which muscles to massage and how much pressure to apply, hummed the right frequencies to stimulate vocal cord awareness. Her voice had gained confidence, no longer tentative or apologetic, but steady with earned authority. That's wonderful, Lily. Try it again. Mama, you can do it, sweetheart. Lily's mouth worked, forming the sounds with effort that would have defeated a child with less determination. Ma, Victoria waited, patient as stone, giving her daughter time to finish the thought. Ma, love you. Not perfect grammar, not standard pronunciation, but unmistakably, Mama love you. The first time either twin had expressed verbal affection to Victoria despite 8 months of her showing up consistently. Rose, not to be outdone by her sister, added, Mama, stay. Victoria's composure shattered. She gathered both girls as close as their wheelchairs and her arms allowed, being against their hair with a rawness that Marcus had never seen from her. Not elegant grief, not controlled emotion, just a mother who'd finally earned her daughter's trust and couldn't contain what that meant. I love you too, so much. I'm not going anywhere, babies. Mama's staying right here, I promise. Always. Marcus stood quietly, slipped from the room to give Victoria privacy for this moment. She'd worked 4 months for it, had shown up every single day even when it was hard, even when the girls were unresponsive, even when she was tired and discouraged and tempted to retreat into the familiar comfort of delegation. She'd earned this, earned her daughter's love through the only currency that actually mattered: presence, consistency, refusal to give up. He found Dr. Chen in the hallway, both of them sharing a knowing look. She did it. Dr. Chen smiled. I heard. Lily told her mother, I love you. About time, frankly. Mrs. Hayes has been putting in the work daily. She deserved that acknowledgement. Marcus leaned against the wall, let himself feel the profound satisfaction of watching someone learn something he'd taught them, then surpass his teaching by making it their own. This was what it meant to help people, not doing everything for them, but showing them the path and trusting them to walk it. Late April brought weather that made Seattle briefly livable again. Actual sunshine, temperatures that didn't require multiple layers, the kind of spring evening that reminded people why they tolerated 9 months of gray. Victoria suggested a family dinner, nothing formal, just the people who'd made this strange arrangement actually work. Charlie and his wife, Maria, arrived first, bringing homemade tamales that sent Emma into excited bouncing in her wheelchair. Dr. Chen came with her husband, David, a software engineer who had heard so much about the girls he wanted to meet them properly. James appeared without his butler's uniform, looking unexpectedly normal in jeans and a polo shirt. They gathered in the breakfast room, not the formal dining room Victoria used for business functions, but the smaller space that faced the garden. Someone had set the table with everyday dishes, made it feel less like an event and more like actual family coming together. Emma sat at the table in her specialized chair, flanked by Lily and Rose in theirs. The three girls had developed their own communication system over the months. Sounds, looks, small gestures that conveyed meaning more effectively than words. Watching them talk to each other had got old. Victoria stood at the head of the table, glass of wine in hand, but not yet raised. She looked different than she had 8 months ago when Marcus first started working here. Less polished maybe, but more alive. The kind of different that came from actually living instead of just existing in expensive spaces. I wanted to thank everyone who made the last 4 months work. Dr. Chen for her infinite patience with a mother who had to learn everything from scratch. James for being supportive even when I completely disrupted every household routine. Charlie for being the voice of reason when certain stubborn people, she glanced at Marcus, needed to hear uncomfortable truths. Charlie raised his glass with a grin. Any time, Ba. That's what friends do. And Marcus, Victoria turned fully toward him, for teaching me that being present matters infinitely more than being perfect, for showing my daughters what genuine consistency looks like, for reminding me that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by who chooses to show up day after day, even when it's difficult. Marcus felt heat rise in his face. I just did what anyone would do. That's exactly what makes it matter. Victoria lifted her glass higher. To family, however we build it. To family, the room echoed, glasses clinking. They ate tamales and the chef's roasted vegetables and fresh bread that tasted like someone actually cared about making it well. Conversation flowed easily. Charlie telling electrical disaster stories that made everyone laugh. Dr. Chen sharing updates about the girls' progress. Emma attempting to hum along when Maria started singing softly in Spanish. Lily and Rose watched everything with increasing focus, no longer distant or disconnected, but present, engaged, part of the gathering in ways that would have seemed impossible 8 months ago. They couldn't participate the way typical children would, but they were here aware, responding in their own ways. Victoria caught Marcus watching the girls, leaned slightly closer. They're happy. I don't think I've ever actually seen them happy before. Content maybe, or calm, but not this. They have friends now, have stability, have a mother who sees them as whole people instead of problems requiring solutions. That last part was your teaching. That part was you learning. Big difference. Their eyes met, held longer than strictly necessary. Something passed between them that neither acknowledged aloud, but both felt. Recognition that this had become more than an employer-employee arrangement, more than just two parents coordinating childcare. Marcus looked away first, uncomfortable with where his thoughts kept drifting lately. Victoria was his employer, his partner in raising their collective daughters. Nothing more, regardless of what his increasingly treacherous emotions suggested. After dinner, Victoria set up her phone for a group photo. For the record, so we remember this. She positioned everyone in the living room. Dr. Chen and David on one side, Charlie and Maria on the other, James in back. Marcus knelt between the three wheelchairs. Victoria knelt on the opposite side, one hand resting on Rose's chair. The phone timer flashed. Captured a moment that might never be exactly replicated. Three children who'd found each other, two parents learning to share duties, staff who'd become an extended family, all of them building something that defied conventional categories. Later, Victoria looked at the photo on her screen. We look like a real family. Marcus glanced at the image over her shoulder. We are a real family, just not the conventional kind. Is there such a thing as conventional anymore? Probably not. Maybe there never was. Victoria smiled, turned off her phone. I like this version better anyway. The one we're building ourselves. The weeks that followed settled into comfortable patterns, Marcus and Victoria splitting therapy duties, both of them attending to all three girls without clear divisions of whose child was whose. Emma thrived with the constant companionship. Lily and Rose progressed faster with a peer who understood their challenges. The household staff stopped referring to Marcus as the new hire and started just calling him by name, same as they did with Victoria. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in early May, Marcus found Victoria in the garden attempting to plant tomatoes. Her technique remained questionable despite watching several YouTube tutorials, but her determination was admirable. You're supposed to dig deeper than that. Marcus watched her make shallow holes in the raised bed soil. I'm following the instructions. Instructions clearly written by people who've never actually gardened. He knelt beside her, demonstrated proper depth. Like this, roots need room to establish. Their hands brushed in the dirt. Both noticed. Neither pulled away immediately. The moment stretched, charged with something unspoken. Marcus, Victoria's voice was quiet. What are we doing? Planting tomatoes? You know what I mean. He did. Had been thinking about it for weeks, maybe months. The way she smiled when Emma said something funny. How her hand would find his shoulder when they were both working with the girls. The late-night conversations in the kitchen that had nothing to do with therapy schedules and everything to do with just wanting to talk to each other. I don't know. Honest answer. I know what it feels like. I'm just not sure what to do about it. Victoria sat back on her heels, dirt on her jeans and smudged on one cheek. I'm not ready for whatever this might become. Not yet. Neither am I. Marcus meant it. Emma's still adjusting. The girls need stability. We should probably be smart. Take time. Make sure we're not just confusing proximity with something else. Yeah. But when their eyes met again, they both knew the truth. This wasn't just proximity or gratitude or the natural bonding that came from raising children together. Something real was developing between them, built on mutual respect and shared purpose, and the kind of partnership that only came from working toward the same goal every single day. For now, they'd plant tomatoes and raise three girls and be whatever partners meant in this context. The rest could wait until they were both ready to name it. Marcus wiped dirt from Victoria's cheek with his thumb, the gesture more intimate than he'd intended. You've got soil everywhere. Hazard of learning new things. She didn't move away from his touch. You're a patient teacher. You're a dedicated student. They stayed kneeling in the garden, hands still touching in the soil that smelled like possibility. Neither quite ready to stand and return to the careful boundaries they'd maintained. Eventually the moment passed. They finished planting, washed up, returned to their separate spaces. But something had shifted that couldn't be unshifted, and they both felt it. That evening, after all three girls were settled for the night, Marcus stood on the small balcony off his apartment, looking at Lake Washington. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. The tomatoes probably won't survive my gardening skills, but thank you for trying to teach me anyway. He typed back, they'll be fine. You're better at this than you think. At gardening or at everything else? Both. Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, good night, Marcus. Sleep well. You too. Marcus pocketed his phone, checked on Emma one final time. She slept peacefully, deeply, in a room with windows that showed trees and stars, in a house that had somehow become home, despite all the reasons it shouldn't have. He thought about the past 4 months, about Victoria learning to be present for daughters she'd been too afraid to fully love, about Emma thriving with medication Marcus could never have afforded alone, about three girls who'd found friendship and shared understanding, about partnerships that started as transactions and became something truer than either person had expected. Sometimes families weren't born. They were built, piece by piece, day by day, by people who chose to show up even when it was hard, who chose to trust even when it was scary, who chose to let others help carry weight that had been shouldered alone too long. Marcus turned off the light, closed Emma's door, and headed to his own room, thinking about tomatoes that might or might not survive Victoria's questionable gardening skills. thinking about how sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected places, built by people who were just trying to do right by the children they loved. Thinking that maybe, just maybe, this strange, imperfect family they'd accidentally created was exactly what all of them had needed all along.